Meeting to order.
That's what I saw, yeah.
Welcome guests. First thing we're going to do is have the approval of the minutes from November 30th.
We're not going to have public comment first?
No,
All right.
you gotta follow. Oh, I guess I did skip that, you're right. All right, we're going to hold off on the for the minutes, and we're going to have public comments. My apologies.
Good evening, Ginny Hewitt from the library. I have a letter for you confirming some of the information we provided in our meeting because there were some questions about it. Under Mass General Law, we're unable to go out to bid for the exterior project now. I have documentation from the town engineer on that. There were some questions about the budget estimate. What we have is the actual bids, experience and what the marketplace has told us they will charge, and they're general contractor bids, so they're not broken out into categories, so there's not like a detailed budget, but what we have is the specifications from the bid documents, and we also have our experience in the marketplace telling us what those bids, what that work will cost. And then there seem to be some questions about whether we have a maintenance program in place. We do. We've had it for decades, and that funding is in the DPW's budget now, but that work will continue. This is to do chemical stripping once every 100 years. So I'll give you this letter.
Alrighty.
Oh, sure.
I'm on the same topic, so if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just, we put together some information in terms of the restoration timeline.
Okay.
So you'll have it in there attached, the amount of time, just to pick a few dates here. October 11th, the trustees discussed starting this project. So it goes back a long ways. And the bid range that Ginny was alluding to, that town meeting approved in December, actually you guys approved December of 540,000. There's 490 left. The range on the bids, we did go out twice, was 642,000 to 776. So you take the 490 plus the 300 that we're asking for, and you're in the 790 range. So we believe that Sean Libby, being the other person, believes that that probably will be sufficient funds to do the work, considering the business climate that we're currently in.
Okay, thank you. If there's any other questions from the board members about this particular topic, it won't be dealt with tonight, but would you submit those to me in writing, please, and I'll forward them on. Next.
Yes, good evening. My name is Elaine Shuffler, and I'm here to read a letter to the Community Preservation Commission from Mr. Dave Callahan, who was unable to be here tonight. From Dave Callahan, 131 Clearwater Drive. In the interest of full disclosure, let me first note that I am a member of the town's Real Estate and Open Space Committee, which has had its judgment questioned regarding support for the Jediah Eldridge CPC submission. The comments I'm about to make are my own and are not meant to represent the opinions of other committee members. My family spent summer vacations in Harwich since before I was born, acquiring our first house near the Country Inn in 1968. During my working years, I was always dismayed as I saw more and more property gobbled up into housing and commercial development, severely changing the Cape I enjoyed so much. Since retiring 5 years ago, I finally have the time to help protect this town against overdevelopment. While not formally trained in deed research, I do a fair bit of it for the committee and the Harwich Conservation Trust. I've spent more than a few hours investigating this and other properties in town so that it may be preserved forever. Like many others, I wish we could put all undeveloped property into conservation. Sadly, this will never be the case, as there is limited funding for conservation land. Therefore, the decision on which properties to acquire needs to be done carefully. In my second year on Rios, we had multiple meetings where we discussed whether we should continue to be reactive, make recommendations on what comes available, or should we be proactive, going after specific properties that fit well with an overall vision. we decided to take the long view and focus on parcels that fit well with adjoining conservation lands and were severely threatened. The Jediah Eldridge property is on the east side of Hawks Nest Road, also known as Seth Whitefield Road, with approximately 1,800 feet of frontage. North of it is 300 feet of a parcel the town owns as conservation, although I've been told that an abutter disputes that ownership. On the west side of the road, from south to north, is 100 foot of a house facing Harwich Heath Road. 1,100 feet of Harwich Conservation Trust owned conservation parcel, 2 house lots, 300 feet, and the remaining 300 feet is Hawks Nest State Park. This road is currently dirt with little traffic, but is about to become very different, separating the east side from the west with subdivision traffic. A development has begun on Raptor Road, north of the Jediah Eldridge property, and the town has issued a permit to the developer to widen Hawks Nest Road up to Round Cove Road, so additional lots can be developed. I have spoken with the person developing Raptor Road and the property to the north. He acquired that property by doing deed research in owners unknown and turned that into taxable land. Most important to this discussion is that he also told me he looked into Jediah Eldridge property but couldn't figure out a way to get it because of the way the property is split between the estate's beneficiaries. In my opinion, if he couldn't get it, there is little risk that anyone would. Purchasing the Jediah Eldridge property with CPC funds now will limit the town's ability to move forward on 2 opportunities that were deemed by Real Estate and Open Space Committee as a higher importance. One is over 50 acres, also in the Six Ponds District of critical planning concern. The other 30 acres abutting multiple town-owned properties, including the Water Department and Thompson's Field. It would be a shame to lose these owners unknown parcels because a developer got to them before the town. Clearly, this is the town's choice. I am but one voice, but I am not convinced the Jediah Eldridge purchase is needed at this moment. As long as it is kept off the tax auction list, in my opinion, it will remain in its current undeveloped state. I have copies for you all.
Next.
Good evening, Bob McCready from Harwich Board. Again, based on the procedure that's being followed, I have questions that I'd like to get out, I guess, for a couple of the applications being presented tonight, and just don't know if the same questions will be asked by the committee later. So, CPC has certainly supported numerous historical document preservation projects over the years, and that's great. There are 2, there's something coming up in the form of applications 4 and 5 for presentation tonight on storage of town documents. As written, the way, at least as I can tell from the way the applications are written, they appear to create a basic storage facility and move the town records into that facility, presumably establishing and implementing a standard municipal retention policy along the way. I'd like to hear how this differs from standard and required business practice that would be part of a standard town administrative budget and plan. If I understand the application, such a facility, policy, and practice would cover all town document storage. Many of these documents would have destruct dates, I would think, and therefore not be appropriate for historic preservation as a historic resource for preservation. And others would be required by law to be kept regardless of their being historic resources. If that is the case, I'd like to hear how the distinction is being made between historic and non-historic documents and how the funding request addresses this distinction. I'd also like to hear how the facility and storage process will meet standards for preservation of historic resources. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Young lady?
That's great. Linda Cipolla, Harwich Port. I'm speaking on Open Space 12, the Eldridge property. This is not a for or against question. I hope to hear the exact method of funding for the total cost of this proposal. Based on the discussion at a recent real estate and open space meeting, it appears that the application request of $369,000 will not repay the outstanding real estate taxes and accrued interest that are currently on the town's books, and this is well in excess of that $369,000. Specific source information as to the closing of this funding gap would be appreciated in order to maintain transparency and accountability to the public. The public should be completely aware as to the implications of this gap and how the taxpayers will be impacted if additional funds are required to cover the gap, and where would those funds come from, and how would they impact tax rates and everything else. This information hopefully will be part of this evening's discussion, and I hope that the committee will seek to get those questions answered. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else who would like to speak under public comment? Okay, if not, we're going to move on to the approval of the minutes, November 30th, 2017.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of November 30th, 2017.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, before we start tonight's projects, I have a request for the town administrator to go first and to reverse the order here. Is it okay with the board? It's the board's, he has a family event to go to, so.
Okay.
Consensus of the board that,
But only for that reason. Only for that
Only
reason.
for that
No other reason would we do.
Right.
Mr. Administrator.
Actually, I'm going to have Amy Uelski do the initial presentation, and then I'll address some of the issues in regards to funding.
If I may, I made copies of the presentation along with a note section, if you'd like
Go
to
ahead.
take notes that way. If you find it useful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For the record, I'm Amy Usowski, Conservation Administrator for the town. I'm going to start a little bit by going over the background of the Judah Eldridge property and from the conservation perspective. The town is requesting the funding of $369,000 to come out of the open space sector of the funds. And like I said, first we're going to go through a little bit of the reasons why environmentally, and also how under the open space and rec plan, as well as the local comprehensive plan, that this project meets these criteria. If I could have the next slide. So the property is 24.6 acres on the east side of Hawks Nest Road. It abuts Harwich Conservation Trust land as well as the Hawks Nest State Forest. It consists primarily of wooded upland with social trails that are created by just people in that area, their horses. They're already in place. It's within a Zone 2 water recharge area within the Six Ponds District of Critical Planning Concern, as well as within the Pleasant Bay watershed. It's within a residential zone and could potentially be developed into 10 house lots. The town is asking, well, first let me back up and say that this project has been supported by the Conservation Commission as well as the Board of Selectmen. Did not receive support by the Real Estate and Open Space Committee. We are requesting $369,000 worth of funds. That was the appraised value to take the property by eminent domain for conservation purposes. Chris can highlight this a little bit better about the title research that has been done, the funding mechanism. And I will just say that because it is a town project, it would be potentially eligible if the town were to acquire it for land grant funds in the 50% of the purchase amount, I believe. How this project benefits the citizens of the town of Harwich. There's multiple ways which it would benefit the towns of Harwich, citizens of the town of Harwich. It would benefit the citizens in that it would be another area where people could go and walk and enjoy the natural environment. Also, it would enhance the town's ability to protect its natural resources, which includes water quality. It would reduce the amount potentially, along with other parcels, if we were to acquire other parcels in the future, that the town would have to sewer. This is in the Pleasant Bay watershed, in which the Mass Estuaries Project has given a total maximum daily load removal. 36% of the nitrogen entering Pleasant Bay needs to be removed. Major contributors on-site septic systems. This would eliminate 10 potential house lots within the Pleasant Bay watershed. Site's also, as I said, located within the Six Ponds DCPC, which was developed specifically to improve water quality in the area. Sorry, I'm just going through our presentation. Next, please. It's just an aerial showing the relation of the project. Sorry, it's a little bit vague. There is a red X. You can see Hawks Nest Road there with the green on the left, and there's a red X to the left of the pit, and that is the Judah Eldridge property. Shows you the proximity and connectivity to state conservation land. Next. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Before we get to questions, let me,
about the funding.
let me just touch upon a couple things and appreciate the opportunity. Actually, this year, in December 27th, will be my 4th year that I'll be in the town of Harwich. So I've actually been involved in doing work with this project basically since I've started. And I do think that there's a little bit of interesting history to it, that we originally considered this site and done a fair amount of research on it to determine that this would be a viable recharge site. And as folks know, there was a No on 9 campaign, and they didn't want to have it as a recharge site. What a lot of folks may not know is right after that campaign commenced, there was some efforts by the neighbors to come out and talk about make this a conservation parcel. And due to some of the development restrictions that do exist on it, I don't think we even had the legal ability, if memory serves, to put a municipal facility up there. So there were some zoning concerns, so it had limited utilization. And I think that the neighbors, where we asked initially to see if we could do a recharge site, and they came back with, well, instead of recharge site, would you consider a conservation site? So this is a grassroots effort that came up that now has percolated back to the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen, as well as Conservation, have supported it. So I think it's important to kind of understand. I had a conversation just the other day with Mr. Callahan and kind of talked, and one of the things that comes up, I understand his passion, I understand his comments. Number one, I don't think the town should be in the business of trying to outrace people that want to develop property and gain property. So, I think that there's an area where if people are going to be able to develop property and use property, that's one thing. The one thing about this site that I think is important, and for me, and I think more so for the Board of Selectmen, there's 22 different divisions to the town of Harwich. One of those divisions is our tax department, our treasurer's office. And we have a tax collection issue from owners unknown. And as even he said in his letter, it's not going to be cleaned up. So there is an issue where someone from the outside is not going to be able to come in and clear that title easily. So the taxes are going to continue to build up. And they're already coming up on almost 10% of our total outstanding amount of money. So I think a Board of Selectmen, they're executive of the community, like I'm the Chief Administrative Officer. You have to look at all 22 divisions and what makes sense. So it makes sense, in my opinion, from a conservation standpoint, and it certainly makes sense from a tax standpoint to look at this property to see what we can do. I do believe that only government has the ability to come in and take it by eminent domain. And the reason why we would do it by eminent domain is that clears the title. It makes the property ours. So all the issues about who owns what and the history of it go away by doing that. A product of that legislation that allows us to come in and take it means that we have to put money aside to pay for it. So there's two things, and to Ms. Cipolla's question earlier, I will address that. That we want to have the ability that if we go in, conservation, acquire it, and if you're going to take it by eminent domain, you have to have a purpose as to why you're taking it. So the purpose in this case would be conservation. We would go in, acquire the property, put $369,000 into an escrow account, and the property is ours, and it's there for conservation purposes. As part of the escrow, that transfer element, one of the first things that has to be paid out of that is the taxes owed. So as was pointed out, there are more taxes owed than there is money that's in the appraisal. I have, at least a verbal opinion, I have a meeting in a week or two with Attorney Giorgio, and I will confirm this, but he had indicated to me that the 369 would be sufficient, and there is a separate state statute that allows for the balance to be wiped off. That you get that balance, if it is 400,000, is cleared off. So the town won't have to come up with the extra money to be able to do that. So I think that there is a lot of legal ability for us to clean the title, put it into use that's more appropriate, quite honestly, for that area, to be responsive to what the neighbors have indicated. I mean, isn't that what government about? You know, part of what government's about. People come forward with concepts, and we're supposed to take them under consideration and do due diligence in that endeavor. So I think that what we're here tonight for is to see if we can bring this through to fruition and have this property become part of the conservation inventory. And one of the things, and I recognize that there's limited funds, you had asked me to see if I could do a priority list. So in the recommendation that I had, that I have presented to the selectmen, I do have where it's 369,000, that 319 would be requested from open space, and 50,000 would come from free cash. So it would be a partnership between the selectmen and CPC to get this accomplished. So I think I covered what I wanted to cover from a finance perspective, and happy to take questions at this point.
Joe?
So allow me to be salacious for a moment. Are we asking CPC to fund eminent domain?
We're asking CPC to fund the acquisition of a parcel of land for conservation purposes,
Which will be done by eminent domain.
which will be done by eminent domain.
So for me, I've been in municipal government for 30 years. There is no greater third rail than the phrase eminent domain,
I hear you.
in my opinion, federal, state, municipal, whatever the case may be. Can you talk a little bit about municipally how that process would work, specifically on the eminent domain?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm in 28 years in, so you have 2 years on me, and it is
But
a
I
little...
look much older, so.
I think, I can't believe I'm actually going forward to actually, I don't think I've ever really done too much eminent domain, because
you don't see a lot of
it
it.
is a sticky wicket.
Right.
I think the issue that makes it a sticky wicket is that if you have an owner that wants to contest it, they can come out and they can contest the appraisal. If they're successful in the contesting of the appraisal, then we have to pay the additional money, and essentially we could pay penalties for not getting the appraisal right. In this circumstance, and I really believe this is a very unique case, that there are numerous property owners, alleged property owners to this. And I can't remember, at one point, I thought I heard somewhere between 200 to 300 is what Dave Scannell, the former assessor, said. So we put $369,000 into an escrow account, and we have that go towards, ultimately towards paying taxes. Now I'm John Q. Public, and I believe I have a 1% interest in that parcel. So I come forward, or let's make the math easier, 10% interest in the parcel.
Mhm.
I come forward and say, I have a 10% interest in the parcel. That was all wrong. Your appraisal was wrong, and it shouldn't be 369. It should be whatever. Pick a number, double that.
Mhm.
Even if he's successful, The taxes still have to be paid, so the taxes are paid, so there is no money left in the escrow account. They have to contest and say, this land is, you know, you got the value wrong. They go through that whole endeavor, and what would they get out of that? Let's just say they got the 369. They would get 10% out of that process. And I honestly think, as the point was made earlier, there are people that have looked at this site, that have wanted this site, and if it was easy, they would have gone out and found these folks and got their interest and developed it.
Mr. Chair, can I continue?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to pick up on that. I think there's no greater way than to attract attention of alleged, and I appreciate that word and I agree with that word, alleged property owners than throwing out the phrase eminent domain. What my concern is, if you tie the phrase eminent domain taking with, aside from the title slide, would be your second slide, which says that some title search has been completed. So can we quantify some? 10, 25, 90%? What is some title search?
Well, we just want to update, so I do have a company that we've engaged, and actually I need to set up a meeting with them to find out how they've made out with this, and we will do an update on the title, just in case there is any additional information. So part of my meeting with Attorney Giorgio will be to go back through and do that. To your earlier point, when we went for the process to acquire it as a recharge site, we did use eminent domain, and we didn't get, was that 2014? 14 or 15, the memory escapes me at the moment, what specific year. But we've been down that road of
Okay.
kind of waving the flags for anybody that wants it. And at this point, if they had wanted it, I would think they would have engaged already.
So my last question relative to eminent domain, and I appreciate and thank you for the way that you've described the process. My limited experience with eminent domain, and it's not at the municipal level, but is that it's a process that even if there's a few people, if there are potentially hundreds, even if there's one or two, they can drag the process out for a while. Is it possible that this funding could occur, but it gets tied up through the eminent domain process for a number of years?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
The title is cleared immediately, so eminent domain makes the property ours. What could get tied up.
Sorry, yeah, what I mean is the
What they
litigation.
They could
relative to
tie
the
up
eminent
and
domain.
say, you know, if somebody has 10%, they could contest that, and then that's a process. That's a legal process that would take years.
All right, so let me refine my question, because thank you for that point. No, not the eminent domain itself, the legal reaction to said eminent domain. If we're talking about estimates that there could be, well, I think I heard 200 to 300 or several hundred, even if we're talking about scores of people, it takes 1 or 2 lawsuits to bog it down. Sorry, no pun intended.
There's no bogs on
There's
this
no
property,
bogs.
to my knowledge.
You can tell I'm new here. Anyway, but truly, I come back to that point, because what I've noticed in this group that we've been working on, in a good way, is trying to make sure that the funds that were allocated previously, if they're not being used, get them back into the mix. I need to get a better sense of, if we go forward with this, what is the potential for that money being tied up because of the legal reactions to eminent domain?
I think that, you know, you're making a lot of, and I get the exercise, that someone has to first come in, invalidate our appraisal that was done by a valid appraiser. They have to invalidate that or say that it was wrong. That's their first hurdle. The second hurdle is, then they have to say, now, why couldn't the town claim that if they came forward after we cleared the taxes, if the taxes are 400, now they're on to that part, well, they have their portion of the taxes that they owe us. And then once they get through those 2 hurdles, if there's anything left, then they would potentially get a small percentage of that. And, you know, I think the business in this case of going through all that work to make $2,000 or $3,000 when it's going to cost you more than that, I just think it's very unrealistic that someone would actively pursue and be successful. Does that mean that, you know, no one's going to sue us? You know, of course not. People can sue a municipality and frequently do.
Yep.
I've been in this business a long time, and I've been on the administrative side a long time and had a lot of people sue us. So it happens, but we would litigate that and protect the town's interest, as we would in any.
So is it fair to say you don't see that as being an obstacle?
I don't think it makes a lot of business sense for somebody to come forward and pursue that endeavor.
My last questions, if I may.
That was the last one.
Okay,
Oh,
Good,
no.
thank you. In the application, it's going to happen sooner or later, I'm going to get it going, I know that much. On the second page, we've got a dangling sentence. At the very end, where you talk about the commissions, boards, committees, and organizations. I don't want to make assumptions, I think I know what's happening, but the last line says, "The real estate and open space."
Yeah, I know, I reread it this
I
afternoon, and that,
apologize. Well, on the next one, that
Suspense is
says,
killing me.
Real Estate and Open Space
the
Committee
suspense is killing me.
continued, this application was written prior to the Real Estate and Open Space making a decision on whether to support this. Real Estate and Open Space did not support it.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No, it's hanging out there. And then lastly, I apologize, but acronyms are not my friend.
Sure.
There's two references, TMDL and then DCPC.
Sure.
But I think from Mr. Callahan's letter, he's defined DCPC as District of Critical Planning Concern.
That's right.
So what about TMDL?
That stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. The Massachusetts Estuaries Project, another acronym for you, MEP.
Bring them on.
For a lot of the watersheds on the Cape, especially the major watersheds, they have assigned nitrogen loads for those systems. And they tell you approximately how much percentage of nitrogen you need to remove from said watershed to get it healthy again. So they have assigned a TMDL for the Pleasant Bay watershed, which Harwich is part of 36% removal.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
The
Mr. Chairman.
The number
You're
one
welcome.
contributor to that is households, so the removal of households. And this is outside of the Phase 2 area.
Thank you.
All righty, Jim.
Okay, David, or Mr. Chairman, before I ask my questions, I would like to ask you whether or not it's proper, since we have a representative of the Real Estate and Open Space Committee on this committee, to get a statement as to why that committee rejected this as an acquisition? Is that
no.
proper?
I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ask someone, I don't know the answer to that question. But Joe, maybe you can help me out with that?
I'll try.
Okay.
So I think I've heard my colleague ask if it was proper through the chair to ask for that,
Yes.
correct? Yep.
Correct.
It's certainly proper to ask, but under parliamentary procedures that we use, the chair couldn't compel anyone to speak. So it's something that could be asked as a courtesy of the committee, but we're not dealing with summonses and subpoenas and all that fun stuff, so there's no obligation to respond. The question could be asked through the chair.
Well, at this point, I'm not gonna allow that question to be asked.
Okay.
But I would suggest that if we can get an agenda item, we can ask the chair of that particular board to come in front of us and then ask it,
That's fine.
so.
That's fine. Okay, and now to my real questions. Okay, could you tell us approximately how much taxes is?
It's over 400,000,
It's over 400,000.
474.
474.
Okay, is it
What?
possible?
474,000, I believe.
Okay.
It's in
I know it's over
four-
400.
It's in the
Okay,
470
yeah, I
range,
was just looking for a ballpark
Yep.
number, not an exact
between
number.
470 and 480.
Would it be possible for the town to take this property, through tax title?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, I only go so far. I was prepared on the eminent domain piece. The tax title is a little different. I'm not sure what the issues would be that we would have with the tax title. The one thing, that tax title doesn't necessarily clean up the ownership. I mean, we get ownership, but if we don't know who they are, it still leaves some question in mind in terms of what we could then reuse it for. So again, the eminent domain piece cleans that part and gives us clear title to the property. Where tax title, I don't believe, does that it doesn't do that as effectively.
It may not do it as effectively, but if you took the property in tax title, you could always do what's called a confirmatory taking, which would clear the title. And you would do that after you did the tax title.
Yeah, I can ask, if there's more questions, I can certainly, when I meet with Attorney Giorgio, go through, the different elements. I know in my conversation with him, he's the one I rely upon, the municipal attorney, that he thought the eminent domain was the better route to take and not tax title.
Okay, if you could
Excuse
ask-
me, Jim, one moment. Is that a question to ask that you want information on?
Yes, I would like information on that, so if
Would
you,
the town administrator provide that information for us, please?
Yes.
Go ahead, Jim.
okay. Now, my other question has to do with the eminent domain procedure. And just to give full disclosure, I have had 40 years of commercial real estate law experience with public agencies, including eminent domain, and at one point was managing litigation on 60 different eminent domain takings by public agencies in the Boston area. So I have a little bit of experience on that. And I guess my question with regard to this, Chris, is that when you put, you had given a good explanation about putting the pro tanto payment in escrow. And when that occurs, any claimants for additional funding have to come forward within a 3-year period. So it would have to remain in escrow for a 3-year period. Should nobody come forward within that 3-year period, and the town is able to liquidate that escrow, where would that money go?
I don't know, there would be no escrow left, because the money that would go in is 369.
Correct.
The money that would go out, which I had an attorney confirm this for me, if the taxes are over 400,000, then the money goes in to pay the taxes first.
Okay, and that's really the answer
So
to
there
my
is no-
question, that it would pay
There is
the
no
taxes.
residual.
So my concern with this, and that's why I asked you to investigate tax title, is that basically what we're doing by voting, if we do approve this acquisition, what we're doing is we're voting $369,000 to pay taxes.
That's not,
That's my impression of what this ultimately is going to do.
well, Mr. Chairman, the mechanics may end up that way.
Yes.
But you know as well as I do, we're acquiring the property, and the deed would be for conservation purposes and putting money into an escrow.
Okay.
The fact that the property owner, or unknown property owner in this case, didn't pay their taxes is not, and necessarily the direct element to anything to do with the ownership and what the ownership is going to be used for. If it was going to be used for something other than what CPC would do, I wouldn't be sitting here. So,
No,
and
that
actually, I wasn't sitting here when we tried to do it by eminent domain for the wastewater.
No, and that I understand, Chris, and that's why I asked the question
I've-
about investigating tax
And
title.
Mr. Chairman, I know I've tried to simplify it a little bit to say to people in the community that, this is kind of a win-win. And I think perhaps people have been a little bit too, they don't like the cavalier attitude that, it is a nice way to resolve two issues simultaneously. But I think the Board of Selectmen and administration, our job is to resolve issues. And this resolves two issues, or partially resolves one. It gets us conservation land, and it helps to get some old taxes off of our books.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
That's all I have, David.
Kathy?
Do we know how many years the taxes have been in arrears?
We can get that for you. I think it's well over 10 years. I mean, it goes back a long ways.
So that somebody was paying taxes up till maybe 10 years ago, or?
No, I
No.
think even longer.
Longer.
Yeah. I can get you the schedule.
And typically, how long does a eminent domain process take? The legal part of it?
Not long, is my understanding. Jim
Yeah,
may have as much. Once we get
Mr.
clear, then
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead,
if I
Jim.
can help
Go
Chris
ahead.
on
Yeah,
this.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, to do the actual eminent domain taking, you just have to have a certain degree of notice, and, it's either 30 or 60 days' notice before a vote of the taking board, which in this case would be the Board of Selectmen. Once the taking is made and the vote is made and it's recorded, title to the property, as Chris said, does revert immediately to the town. And the only question is that, as to the value and whether or not somebody is going to sue the town on the value. And as I mentioned, they have 3 years in order to, raise that litigation if indeed they choose to.
I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you, Chris.
And do we know what the legal costs are that are associated with eminent domain taking?
I did ask, I was told minimal. We would absorb it in the legal budget.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can sort of expand on that. Chris is correct. Of doing the actual taking, the legal costs are minimal. All that really the outside attorney has to do is to review the order of taking to make sure it's adequate and then do the recording. So that's a very small dollar amount. Where the cost may come in is if anybody files litigation, then you're into litigation, which can be quite extensive. And then you're into hourly rates of counsel to defend the town. And litigation can be resolved pretty quickly if you're willing to sort of negotiate a settlement. If not, it can go on for up to, I had cases that went for up to 3 years. But again, you do get the title immediately.
Mary?
One follow-up question, if I may, through you to Jim. If memory serves, my eminent domain was a few years ago, but if memory serves, that eminent domain order of taking has to include notices and awards, the pro tanto awards for all of the potential owners. So we're going to have a full, before eminent domain can happen, they're going to have the full title search and identify whoever they can identify and then award the pro tantos as a part of that eminent domain order of taking, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So the additional expense is actually pre-order of taking and recording. It's really that search, the title search.
Yeah, a full title search is, always required, and then you are accurate if there are multiple owners, of multiple parcels that are being taken. Each parcel has to be dealt with separately, which also may mean a separate appraisal for each parcel.
So one follow-up, if I may,
Go ahead,
Mr. Chair. The second part to your earlier question, on a tax taking, in the tax taking, the court's doing the title search. And we're paying the court for the title search, but the fees go that route. And then the court is ultimately responsible for making the determination as to who those individuals are, if memory serves.
Okay, thank you.
Does that jive with your recollection as well?
To be very honest with you, I never did a tax title.
Tax titles, okay.
So, yeah, I think I will defer to you on that issue.
Okay.
Kathy?
They lost me, now go on. Honestly, so, they lost me at that pro tanto word or whatever it was. So move on.
It's the thesaurus time. Dan?
I thought she said tanto, and I'm saying
Yeah.
tanto. I have no questions.
Mary?
Jim beat me to mine, so I'm good. Thank you, Jim.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time and attention.
Hope you make the concert.
7 o'clock.
There we go.
Thanks, Amy.
Okay, so we're going to go back to H1, correct? Yep. Arboro House presentation.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Charlene Greenhalgh, the Assistant Town Administrator for the record. This application is regarding the Albro House. I thought about doing a PowerPoint, but I'd only be showing you the building next door, so I decided not to. This is an application for historic funds under the CPC. The building is located within the Harwich Center Historic District. It is on the town's historic inventory list, and the Historic District Historic Commission recognized this at a meeting in, I believe, September as a historic project, and they did vote to support the request. The funds requested would provide for a conditions assessment and evaluation of the Albro House. This is critical to ensure restoration and use of the Albro House, one of the key structures in the town's only historic district. The assessment would include a site visit and conditions assessment of major building systems, including structural, plumbing, electrical, and building envelope. Review record site plans, inspect and evaluate septic, assess life safety systems and interior floor finishes. The report will provide a prioritized list of recommendations. Essentially, this assessment can be comparable to a home or property inspection that you would have done if you were to purchase a property or a home, so that you know what needs to happen. You know, is there a crack in the foundation that needs to be looked at? Is the electrical system old and that needs to be upgraded? Just generally those kind of things. The Board of Selectmen continues to determine the course of the future use of the Albro House, whether retain it in its current use as the youth counselor's office and other human services needs, use for other office use, or use for housing. So they're still trying to figure out what to do with the building next door, but until we really know what issues there are in the building itself, we really are kind of stuck moving forward. So that is pretty much my presentation, and if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them.
We'll start with Mary.
And it is only $2,500.
I don't recall from the presentation, I will confirm that Historic did vote to support the project. I don't recall from the Historic Commission presentation, is it essentially a structural engineer that's looking at it as well to make those determinations?
Originally, when we came before this committee last year, it was a much broader, larger scope, and it was a much larger amount that was being requested. It was, I believe, $25,000. We heard a lot of comments from folks in the public regarding that amount, and we decided to look at it a little bit differently. If in the assessment by the inspector that they determined that there's a lot more here than meets the eye, then we may have to go further and get a structural engineer.
Okay.
But at this point, this would not cover a structural engineer for the $2,500.
It's a beautiful building. That's all I
Dan.
have.
Can you tell me how the $2,500 was derived?
It was derived from several things. I touched base with 3 different home inspectors who do both homes and also who do historic homes and also commercial buildings. I got a variety of prices involved, and a septic evaluation is included in that, and that's a pretty standard amount. So when if we do get the funding, we would go out and solicit proposals and bids from more than one company at the price that it's at. We don't really have to do that under procurement, but we would certainly do that to make sure we get the best bang for our buck.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy?
I don't have any questions, thanks.
Jim?
Okay, I just have one question, Sharon. Is the town now committed to both keeping this building and doing a historic restoration of the building?
I can't answer that question until we know what the building needs. It's going to be entirely up to the Board of Selectmen to decide what direction to go.
And the reason I ask that is because in the past there has been discussion about selling the building and getting rid of it, and and that I think last year's proposal was geared more towards trying to help the Board of Selectmen decide what they wanted to do with the building as opposed to historic restoration of the building.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this essentially is that same direction.
Okay.
I do believe that, and I certainly would be comfortable that if this were to be sold, that the $2,500 would have to be put back into CPC funds if it was sold to a for-profit entity. If it went to another nonprofit for some kind of a historic something.
Okay.
I think that would be a reasonable condition and I've in other communities I've been in, that has happened, where if the building is sold to something other than a not-for-profit, that the money has to be repaid back to the town and go back in the coffers for CPC.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good answer to my question. Thank you, Shirley.
Joe?
It's probably a silly question, but given the dollar
No
amount.
such thing.
Oh, wait till you hear.
Okay.
Given the dollar amount, wouldn't it be possible for inspectional services of the town to do that?
We would prefer not to use our own people to do that. We want an outside, independent entity to prepare that report. We do have folks in-house. We don't want our electrical inspector doing the inspection of the electrical for that, because at some point, he would have to then do inspections on that. So we just don't, it's not a proper avenue to go down to have in-house folks do those kind of inspections.
That works for me, thank you.
In a previous time, go ahead, Kathy,
I
I'm
just
sorry.
had a quick question. So are you thinking of using similar to home inspection, like a home inspector? I mean, because a lot of times, I mean, I've bought and sold like quite a number of houses, you know, in the last 10 years. And, you know, there's so many caveats in the inspection because, you know, they can do an electrical inspection of what they can see, but unless they take walls down necessarily, and we've got an old building here, you can't really see what the condition of the wiring is and that kind of thing. And the same thing goes with lots of other things in a house. There's a gazillion caveats in the thing saying, well, you know, I can say this, but I really can't tell you that much, you know, so I'm just.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. And that's why if from this inspection, rather than going out and spending the $20,000+, which was really causing people some angst, we decided to pull it back a little bit. If there is something significant that pops up in the home inspection, they're going to let us know. And if we need to spend more money on it, then you may be seeing us come back. I don't know. You know, even if an electrical engineer went in there, they're not going to pull walls down.
No.
There's going to be those caveats as well, regardless of whether it's, you know, John Q. Public Home Inspector or whether it's Jane Doe Electrical Engineer.
In a previous application, I had requested whether or not there had been a survey done on the property boundary up there. Has that been completed?
The actual
The actual
survey,
property,
I do believe our assessor has done that. He's prepared a number of different plans for the properties.
Can you give me the results of that, please?
Certainly, certainly. Just for the board's edification or the committee's edification, if Mary were to back up, she'd actually be on the Albro property because the lot line goes through this building. And the parking, I know, you can back up and be on another piece of property. And the property line goes all the way back to Old Colony back here. Old Colony, right? Yeah, Old Colony back here. And a strong number of parking spaces are actually on the Albro property. And the septic system for both buildings is on the Albro property. But I can get you that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much for your presentation.
You're very welcome. May the rest of them go this quickly.
All right, next is Pleasant Lake Ave crossing lights. Welcome.
Hi,
Your names, please.
my name is Paul Gasai from the Bikeways Committee.
Shauna Neely from the Bikeways Committee. And we are here today to discuss the application from the committee for $27,000 in recreation funds to install crossing lights and early warning beacons at the Pleasant Lake crossing on Route 124. These would be the same type and style of as the crossing lights and beacons that are installed in 3 other locations in town at Great Western Road, Route 39, and Queen Anne Road. The amount being sought is based entirely on the actual costs for the Queen Anne Road installation that was just done in 2016. I know that there was questions previously from the committee about the appropriateness of using CPC funds for these installations. I just wanted to point out that in addition to the 3 previous installations by Harwich, the towns of Bedford, Fairhaven, Needham, Falmouth, and Brewster have also used CPC funds for installation of crossing beacons and warning lights. I'm happy to answer any questions. This would be the 4th light installed out of a total of 6 that are being sought.
We'll start with Dan.
Well, we've had these types of projects before us in the past, and this particular intersection is very dangerous.
Correct.
So I have no further comment.
Mary?
No questions from me.
Kathy?
I'm just interested in how this is sort of all going to gel with the potential development of a little recreation area there, which has been proposed in the Hinckley's Pond application. It seems like it's going to be a pretty busy intersection if all goes forward, because you're proposing that these lights are going to go right where the crosswalk is between the trail and the little Pleasant
Correct.
Lake store. And that's also where they're proposing a potential bike kiosk and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just kind of wondering how all this is going to,
We
work.
rely very much on the professional staff of the town for installation and for the RFP creation, going out for purchasing, so I'm sure that they would engineer that to work together.
Jim?
Okay, I just have one question. And my question goes to how you would sort of justify this project under the statutory requirement that recreational funds be used for the acquisition, creation, preservation, rehabilitation, and/or restoration of land for recreational use.
I understand the question, that's why I did note the previous approvals by others, and I feel that it's an interpretation by the committee to interpret the law and
Okay.
how they approve or disapprove.
Okay,
Applications.
but what I'm asking for is your interpretation.
I feel that it's a safety enhancement, and it's an enhancement of a recreational facility, amenity of the town.
Okay, thank you.
All said?
Yep.
Joe?
Not really a question, a comment. I live right near there. Let's call it rehab and go for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a more serious question, I guess.
Mine was a comment.
I know, I'm trying to figure out how to structure this. Are you using, is the proposal to use the same type of mechanism you're using presently? The same lights we're using right now?
Whether or not it's the same manufacturer, I can't speak to that. That would go through the RFP process. But the same type, the same solar-powered with a trip beacon, yes.
Okay, so there may be a change in the manufacturer, hopefully.
Depends on responses, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next up, presentation and archiving of public records. Yes, you can. Would you please identify yourselves?
I'm contestant number 1. My name is Carolyn, sorry. I'm Carolyn Carey, the Community Center Director. And I'm Anita Doucette, I'm the Town Clerk.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Come on up. Come on up.
Come on up.
Point of
I
clarification,
apologize.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So are we going to hear both H4 and H5 at the same time?
I don't know how much relates to each one, but if that's the way they want to make their presentation, I don't have a problem with it.
They are pretty relatable, but I'll go through mine. I apologize that Sean is not here, so I'm not going to be able to answer some pretty technical questions about what kind of nails and those kind of things, but I will do my best at giving you the information I do have on the construction of the area that we're speaking of, which is located in the basement of 100 Oak Street at the community center, which is 17,000 square, just not quite 17,000 square feet currently in the basement of that building. And what we are looking to do is build the necessary storage facility for records and retention for the town of Harwich, including all of the historical, and yes, there would be other things in there. There'd certainly be a table which would not be historic, so that people could view it. So I'm not gonna say that the only things in there are historic by any stretch of the imagination. But I did try and do some research because, as you know, I was before you last year, and one of the things that people asked is that I go through the historic, which I have done, and we do have a letter. I believe that it was sent to you, but I have a copy if you need that. The other thing I did is went and visited our library, and Ginny Hewitt was a very big help. I went to the Community Preservation Coalition site, and I can provide the documentation for you, where they defined things like,
I like the title.
documents our historic resources too is the title from the CPC. And some of the questions that were asked, I'll try and answer from this, but I will be happy to give you a whole copy of this article that they published as well, about this. It defines the term of historic as anything noteworthy among past events or old things. So this is how they've defined it. So certainly some of the things that we will be retaining in there might not have a traditional historic, but they do meet the guidelines as requested in this. Some of the other things they point out in this article that is equally as important to have the correct place and environmentally control the record storage area, that those are probably some of the most cost-effective things you can do with CPC money if you're going to continue to do restoration of records and for retention. So, which brings me to, I can keep going, but I think we're kind of in partnership. The idea came up because there are so many records. I know we've spoken, showed you the pictures of the basement here at the town hall, and we certainly have more to show you, but because we needed a space that was more climate controlled and met the criteria of how to accurately store information and historical documentations. So there are some that would not come over. Oh, sorry.
Let me ask of the board, would you like to have the complete presentation, or would you rather break it up as we go? In other words, do you have questions developed as?
I'd rather break it up.
I would rather break
Okay,
it up also.
okay. So at this point, do you have more information for us?
You have the packet in front of you. I included the document that the town engineer made with some minor revisions on it as we evaluate what would be best for those climate issues that someone spoke of in the already existing building, so how it would best pipe in, and those are the things that Sean could certainly tell you more about, but it is one of the things taken into consideration.
Okay, so let me open it up to the board for questions. Kathy, go ahead.
Oh, well, that's sort of, where I'm going, and I looked at the picture, we looked at some of it last year. I'm having a hard time understanding, so each of the units, they'll be floor to ceiling completely contained? Because I understand there's a chain link fence that's gonna protect the entire area for security purposes.
Correct.
But then for the actual unit, because the piece of paper, the drawing mentioned, what was it, 8 15 by 10 and 2 20 by 19. So each of those units, could you just tell me what they're made of? And do they go floor to ceiling, and is that how they're gonna be climate controlled?
They are climate controlled. I do believe they go floor to ceiling, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I was in the basement with Sean as we did this plan, but I also was not on the phone call when he had additional conversations about the need for it to be climate control. What kind of wood is he using? I can't answer that, I'm sorry, but I do know that it met the fire and all those codes. And I know he also, Also included the breakout sheet to.
The cost down.
Yep, the cost, but I, again, am happy to get the questions answered that you want about what, you want to know exactly what material
Well,
will be used to build this
Well, I mean,
structure.
when you say climate control, we've got to try to understand how that, works, I guess. Is each individual unit, and where is it all tied into?
It will be tied right into the community center, the ducts in the community center. I do know that they looked at that.
Okay. Okay.
Anything else?
No, not right now.
Jim?
Okay, first, a question which is just purely a clarification. In your application, it indicated that your starting date was July 2017 and your completion date was September of 2017.
That was last year's.
Yeah, but that was in the application that I read.
I'm
So
sorry, clearly it was an error, and I
that,
could
that,
certainly.
that's what I assumed.
I
But
am
just
human
wanted-
and I have made an error. I apologize. I fall at your mercy.
You're allowed, Carolyn.
Add a
Thank
year to
you.
that, please.
Thank
Okay.
you. Clearly it was, as you know, I've been working on it all that time.
Yeah,
Maybe I
I know
meant
you
my
have.
completion date. That was it.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, the other question I have is sort of a re-asking of a question I asked when you were in front of us last year.
Sure.
Just to confirm that it is still the case. As you know, there has been over the years talk of a potential recreational facility in that basement. Does this preclude that happening in the future if the town decides to go do that?
It does not preclude it in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you. That's all, David.
Joe?
Let me start out by saying that I, both this evening and as we get into our deliberations, fully expect to be making an impassioned plea for this project and the project coming after it, if for no other reason that in the last two municipalities in which I worked, I was the lead project manager on two identical projects of both a storage unit and a records management system, and in both cases previously funded through CPC. I offer that statement because I think there's a fly in the ointment when it comes to this particular project. So before I get to my concern, I do want to ask some questions about the part of the application that says municipal records retention manual notes.
Okay.
It's not numbered, but it looks like it's the, well, this is the page it came after, if that helps you in.
Making a note to myself to number my pages clearly. Okay.
I'm sorry, the chair's lost. Where are you, Joe?
Yeah,
I have a stack of mine, it says,
You might have my notes,
at the
actually.
very top, it says municipal records retention manual notes.
Yeah.
The next line says terms.
Yeah, it's the starting.
Got it. Thank
Oh.
you.
I went by it 3 times. Thank
Okay.
you, Shirley.
So my opening question is, can you tell me where this material came from?
Sure, it came from, my understanding is that it is right from the Massachusetts Records and Retention Office in their booklet that they published.
All right, so thank you for that. Just by point of clarification, if I may, they do publish several manuals,
Yes.
and it doesn't comport to the one that I've been using.
Oh.
That's not to say that my version is the version itself, but I asked that question because, and again, we don't have numbered pages, I apologize, but if you go 1, 2, 3, 4 pages in to start, and specifically the paragraph that reads records storage area, which is in bold and
Correct.
underlined.
Mhm.
So when you look at that, that starts to get to the state requirements through the supervisor of public records
Correct.
on storage of records.
Mhm.
But it doesn't talk about what is in a document known as Technical Bulletin Number 1 by the Supervisor of Public Records. It's an older document,
Okay.
and I can give more information later on, but if you look at that compared to this material, and you've talked about some of the elements, and I know that this might be a conversation more for Sean, But when you talk about fire suppression, there's an expectation of, it's not necessarily a room. It's meant to be a vault and/or a safe. Now, either one of those can be described as a box or a room, but there are very specific standards within Technical Bulletin Number 1 that, because we're talking about public records, whether they be historical or otherwise is irrelevant at this point. It's the storage of public records. If you're going to be moving them from one location to another location, my sense is your project here is you're looking to retrofit an area that would accommodate the storage of public records.
Correct.
I think we may be bound by the requirements of Technical Bulletin Number 1, meaning some of the elements you're talking about are what it gets to, but it would not pass muster if there had to be an inspection by the supervisor of public records. I think that needs to be fleshed out before we go too far into this process. Now, there is a potential solution. In the dollar amount that you're talking about, there are various companies that do what are known as modular storage units, and they place them in existing structures as well as new structures. Your dollar amount may not be far off from what you could accomplish for that, except if you're talking about the construction and the shelving.
No, the shelving was separate.
Perfect. So if you're just talking about the storage,
Correct.
Right.
we as a town may need to consider looking at the modular storage unit, because when they talk about fire suppression, there's an expectation of a fire door and an exterior fire door rated for 4 to 6 hours minimum, interior temperatures, all that, some of which this alludes to but doesn't match the specifications.
And I absolutely apologize. I did not know of Technical Bulletin.
Yeah.
However, I will go home and now
Yeah.
some
Most
fun reading.
most
I'll
people
bring you up to
don't.
date. I did not know of it.
Yeah.
I did know of the mass.
It's not that fun, but.
Yeah.
But it is important, and what I would offer is that I believe that this applies because we're talking about moving currently stored documents from an application that may work, don't look at the pictures yet, to an application. If we're building something, it has to be built to the Technical Bulletin Number 1.
No.
That's my concern. I don't know that that's completely valid yet, but if it is, I don't know that what's proposed would accomplish that.
So Carolyn, based in the request, would you get 12 copies for
Of the
us?
Technical Bulletin and
Well, whatever request that Joe's making at this point.
So if I may, I
Go
can
ahead.
formalize
Yep.
it more than
Yep.
that, because you're working with Sean, if you could just have Sean confirm perhaps, or through administration, just make sure that what's being proposed here would be certified by the supervisor of public records relative to Technical Bulletin Number 1.
And you're on our side, right? I'm just kidding.
I am, believe it or not, I am.
I'm just.
No, it's an excellent point. And the reason why I say that is, this is a laudable project, spoiler alert, and I want to make sure that
As
if
do
this
we.
committee recommends the expenditure, that it's going to pass muster with the state. Because again, it's not, this bulletin was written 22 years ago, and people don't reference it,
No.
and it's more of an after the fact, so I don't want you to get a gotcha.
No, and I appreciate it. I was only kidding. I take this very serious. We don't want to, there's no one who values the dollar of the town's actual dollar more than we do, and so I appreciate it. And I apologize I didn't know about it, but if it was 22 years old, that's as old as
But
I
they-
am.
It's still, it's 22 years old, and it's the current standard, believe it or not.
Thank
And I know,
you.
with friends like me, right?
No, I
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate
Yeah,
it.
no, we'd rather get it right than not.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Would you agree that some of these records might be administrative in nature? Supporting documentation for expenditures and that kind of stuff?
Honestly, I don't know that anyone has vetted what will go in there, to be truthful with you. So I don't think I can say which records will go. My part would be about making the correct
So the
Technical Bulletin Number 1, modular storage that will meet fire. So that part I can tell you about after I read it.
So the focus would be on preserving historical records, however you define that.
I think that the focus would be really on bringing up the standard of what we are currently doing, if I can be honest, which would certainly include that we're not preserving our records correctly,
historical records are not being maintained in the way they need to, and I think so it's all encompassing. But I would defer to Anita, who certainly would know more about the historical records portion of it and has done great research on and takes.
I'm more concerned about the administrative records.
Yeah, and I can't tell you what's going in there. That's my genuine, they were looking for a place. I want to make sure that it is a correct and built so that we can put things in there. I don't know what else will go in there, but I would assume that there would be a policy and procedures of what does go in there.
Thank you.
As there is with how things get rotated and things like that, and so.
Dan, for a moment. Joe, would you?
Well, just if I may, from a, this is the area closest to my professional expertise. Records management, records archives, and all that nature, not only municipal but federal government. And I don't, Mr. Chairman, through you, I don't know if it's, to the question, I was expecting to talk about that with the second proposal, but if there is a question from the committee, what we'd be dealing with here is certainly the municipal retention schedule, which covers historical documents, permanent documents, durable documents, and documents to be destroyed, any number of variations on that. But there's a few other terms that we need to be mindful of. There are historic documents, which the Supervisor of Public Records and the Secretary of State determined to be any record created prior to 1924. So by virtue of that, vital records before 1924, any record before 1874, meaning it could be John Adams' scrap of paper, but it's before 1874, and that's a record that must be kept forever. That's a historic document. Part of why I support these proposals in their theory is we wouldn't know what we have until we do the management of it, which is the next proposal, and I'll hold my remarks for that. But there is the concept of an historical document, and we don't know if the papers that we're using tonight, a portion of which will be retained for a period of time, because something happens at town meeting or some other event, could be deemed to be an historical value. So that's the conundrum that the records access officers and custodians have in Massachusetts today, but also under the enhanced public records law and all of that. You don't know what you have until you've done a management system that's proposed under the next proposal, and whatever you have, for however long you need to keep it, needs to be kept up to exacting standards in that technical bulletin. Believe it or not, I have more to say later. Thank you.
Dan,
One other
go
question.
ahead. Sure.
I noticed that the budget does not include a sprinkler system. Is there
It's already in the basement. It's
Gotcha.
already there.
Thank you.
I'll make
those
sure.
were the questions.
Mary?
I don't have any questions on Carolyn's project.
Okay, and my question has just been answered by Dan. So, go ahead, Kathy.
A sprinkler system's already existing in the basement. So is it gonna be removed from the area where the records are gonna be stored?
There is a way to do it safely. We did, am I getting an okay on it?
No.
Oh, and clearly when I'm looking in the modular storage, that would be part of what we would need to look at, and how the suppression system and things would work there, I'm assuming that. But no, there is certainly a sprinkler system down there, and my understanding is that it was required, but I was not reading the 22-year-old technical bulletin that is now going to become my best friend, apparently.
So, in addition to, go ahead, Joe.
So it's a comment that under the bulletin, if you're talking sprinkler, meaning a conveyance of water, that's not acceptable. Under the technical bulletin, it's a fire suppression system, which is either the powder-based or something. The two natural enemies of paper beyond mold are water and fire. So a sprinkler system would not be allowed if we're calling this our record storage area. It has to be a fire suppression system, separate from sprinkler.
And I do know that Sean did the research on that, so I will get you his research. I am sure he did that. He had several meetings on it, so.
Okay.
But there is.
Are there any other questions for Carolyn? Moving on.
so I guess I'm up.
You're up.
Really, it's not so bad. I like being in the background. Actually, I would probably invite any of you to come to the town hall, to go downstairs in the basement and look what's down there. We do have some pictures, but I also did provide in the application some pictures of the basement, and I got asked to bring this project forward. I will also clarify that none of these records in the basement belong to the town clerk. None of them are my records. I'm doing this on behalf of the town hall. They are the town's records. I'll clarify, they are the town's records. The flip side of this is I've just been given the very dubious honor of becoming the records access officer for the town, given that by the state. So, hence, I'm before you again this year to ask for the project to help restore all these records that
And
are
we're going to slowly go through the photographs that
in
we
the
have.
basement of Town Hall. Some of them have been, you can see, you will see probably on another slide. They're very cramped down there. Every department down there has got every single, has got every,
Hide your shame.
I know.
That does not meet technical bulletin.
And this is, it is a project. It is under the Records Management Program. And this is what I was trying to bring forward, is to help every department in the town organize their records, throw away what we don't need, go according to the Massachusetts General Laws retention schedule. They can get rid of what is not required to keep under that retention schedule, keep what we need to preserve, and go forward with it. Go ahead.
And if I might, every community, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and every community that I've been in, when it comes to the parcel-based information on file for a particular property, whether it's conservation, historic commission, building department, planning, those kind of things, I've known, and those you can get rid of at a certain point. I know of no community that's ever gotten rid of that information because they want a historical history of the properties so that you know what happened, not just 10 years ago, but you also know what happened 50 years ago. So, parcel-based information is very important for a variety of reasons, to figure out if an apartment is legal, or, that's just a simple example. But even though that kind of information doesn't necessarily have to be retained in perpetuity, every community I've ever known and been part of has kept that information because they know the importance of the history that the parcel-based information will provide to somebody who may be doing a search on a particular piece of property.
And to that note, before me, when the building had been expanded in 1987, they were looking through some old records, and at that point in time, they were going to throw something away. And my previous predecessor had the wherewithal to hang on to this document and had it preserved. And come to find out, what it was the original purchase from the Simpson Indians to the settlers of the town of Harwich, dated in the 1600s. It doesn't exist anywhere except for right now in my vault. And this is just, it's a side story. However, to prove that the records are very important, I got subpoenaed to go to land court up in Boston, and subpoenaed with that book and guarded. And because there was a land dispute, and because of that book, and because it was preserved, the person won their court case after I had read what was in this document. They asked me to read it, and I had to decipher what was in that document. And it is in my vault today, and it doesn't exist anywhere else except for in my vault. So preservation, I think it's a very important thing that we preserve all the records that we have. And right now, everything is still kept in paper form. A lot of things are still kept in paper form. And until such point in time that, you know, it can all go digitized or somewhere in a cloud somewhere, we're still required to keep the paper. And all I'm trying to do is help the town organize the paper and chronologicalize the paper that we have in the building. And I'm just trying to help all the other departments. So that's why I'm coming before you.
I'm going to give you a break from the left side of the room. Mary?
I will start.
Well played.
I will also say that, much like Joe is voracious in his support, I am as well. Before they came before the Historic Commission, I had the, I'll say displeasure of touring the rooms downstairs, and those pictures don't do it justice. It's worse than even that. So, to the extent that no public record, whether it's something that could be destroyed or something that could be kept, and it needs to be kept, would ever survive in that environment downstairs for very long. On top of the fact that people can, I'm sure, find their way in from time to time. To Charlene's point, I worked in a community, and I actually appreciate her point with the parcel-based information. We, much like most communities in the state, subscribe to the assessors, to the deed records from the registries of deeds, so those would come in periodically, and our assessor's office had detailed notes. And the most important pieces of information in that entire building, in my own opinion, in City Hall, were in the assessor's records cards that the lady that had worked there for 50 years had kept her notes on. And I can't tell you countless times in the 7 to 10 years I worked there, how many times her card answered a question that I couldn't find from deed research because you couldn't get there, but she had it in her notes, and then you could back into it at the registry of deeds. So there are other things that are helpful that you would normally think you would destroy, but truly you wish didn't get destroyed. And I say that because that City Hall actually had a fire and lost quite a large amount of those old property cards, never to be seen again. So when you went down looking for them, you hoped that it wasn't in the filing cabinets that were destroyed by fire and water, and both at the time. The question I had for you, Anita, was are any of you, I know in your vault currently that it's not just town clerk records?
There's one section of my vault when David Scannell told me that he would be right behind me when I went for the CPC project the first time. And David Scannell got a lot of the old records, his records, digitized, preserved, and they're in my vault as well. He has a section of the vault in the town clerk's office that has a lot of the town assessor's records are in there.
Is there any if I may, one follow-up?
Go ahead.
Is there any expectation that some of your older records would find their way down to the community center at some point in time?
My personal records?
The town clerk records?
I would say no.
Okay.
I would say no. The town clerk's records are in my vault, and that's where I attend them as long as I am town clerk. They will be in my vault.
All set, Mary?
All set for me?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would any records go to the Harwich Community Center?
All the records that are downstairs in the basement, so that you see right here, they're planning, building, accounting,
Historic Commission.
Historic Commission, any committee, commission, board, any entity that has any record, even in this building, all those records are downstairs. Selectmen, administrators' records, they're all downstairs. And this is all we're trying to do, is get all of these records in one central place so that they would not, if you could please come over, I would be more than happy to show you what's down there.
And what type of fire prevention system is there?
right now in the building?
Water.
Yeah,
Is
oh
it even
no.
sprinkled down? I don't know.
It was damaged, some records have been damaged by
Yeah,
water, but I
By
don't think
water
we.
leaking.
Water,
If I may interject, before you asked that question, I literally looked around the top of this building to see where the sprinkler system was.
yeah. Downstairs really, I would say no.
I have asthma really badly, and I can only spend like 5 minutes down there. I'm the one who took the pictures, and there were certain rooms I actually physically couldn't go into.
Right.
So that's how kind of nasty it is down there.
Right. I mean, I'd be more than happy if you have a few minutes after the meeting, I'd be more than happy to take you downstairs.
I have to be someplace after this.
That's all right.
Come in tomorrow.
Come in tomorrow.
Maybe it wasn't part of my packet, but I didn't see a budget where the composition of the $40,000.
Yeah, this guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's the same one that, oh, okay, never
Okay.
mind, I got it.
Right?
Yep.
No?
I don't know what you're looking at.
That
I'm
one I
sorry.
asked you before the meeting. I
Is
shouldn't
that
have
the
said
breakdown
anything.
from?
Yeah, that's it.
Shouldn't have said anything.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I couldn't.
I shouldn't have.
No.
Do you have that, Dan?
This was
You have
given
that
to
breakdown?
us.
Yes,
October.
I do have that, but I didn't see
only have
how the
one page of it.
$40,000 connected
Two
into
sides,
that.
eh?
I don't have two sides.
Oh,
Oh,
I don't either.
Oh, I do.
Well, I gave you yours.
some do,
Mary.
some don't.
You got that tonight, right, Mayor?
Because
You were
I had
lucky.
the same
I
question
didn't
that
see
Dan
the-
had.
I'll make a PDF and send it
Okay.
to everybody.
Okay, fine, thank you.
That's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
so that $40,000 is built into this $62,000?
No,
No, it's
no,
a
no, it's separate.
There's a separate document?
Well, it's a separate expense.
Right, my project would be $40,000. That's what I'm looking for.
That's what I'm not seeing, where the $40,000 is.
I don't have the sheet.
Is that 40, Carol, in this budget?
May I look?
Go ahead, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Keep kicking that little thing.
I don't have it either.
Because that ties into
I
the,
think last year I
Tonight?
provided you with all the,
We can do that again.
I can be more than happy to do it again.
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
that's just yours.
Yeah, I'll be more than happy to get it to you again.
That's fine.
Yeah,
Okay, I do have the breakdown from the company.
Okay,
I'd
thank
be
you.
more than happy to.
No further questions.
Okay. Kathy?
This is a rhetorical question, but you said the state has designated you as this, what was the title again?
Records Access Officer.
Okay. And this is, statewide, every town has a records
Correct.
person. And so you're required to do certain things under this heading.
Yes.
And did the state provide any funding?
No.
That's what I mean, it's a rhetorical question.
No.
It's like, whatever.
No, how this
Unfunded
happens,
mandate.
if you'd like to know really how this happens, a request comes to me through a written form. I have so many days to produce, so I have to, if someone asks me for contracts for whatever, I have to contact all these other departments. I work with them, then I have to get the records back to me, and then I'm responsible to send them off to whoever's requested this information. So it's another hat. It's another hat.
Right.
And this, what I'm asking is just to kind of help the other departments. If I'm requested something, it's to help the other departments say, oh, I don't know what box it's in downstairs, I have to go through, okay, it's here. We're gonna categorize, we're gonna get everything all in order, so if I call you up and say, okay, I need the CPC minutes from, I'm just using that as
Right,
an
yeah,
example.
of course.
Okay, we'll be able to go there, get it, and we're done.
So this proposal from this King
King Company, correct.
Company,
Uh-huh.
it includes shelving and boxes and that kind of thing?
Yes, I have it with me. I did bring it with me, but I didn't make.
No,
It's just-
I know you had talked about it last year.
Last
We
year.
had taken a look at a copy. We didn't all need a copy.
Oh, okay, yeah,
No,
no, I
thank
have.
you.
This is their whole proposal right here.
Mhm.
And they've been very, they're still
And
waiting.
Can I ask if
Yes.
King has been consulted about, say, the size of the units and whether they're appropriately,
Did come over and see this.
coherent with the size of the shelving, et cetera, and, okay.
They did come over and do a site visit at the community center.
this company, this particular King Information Systems, has also been used by other towns, and they're a reputable company, and they work very well
Yeah.
with a lot of town clerks and a lot of people that are
Was
trying
it
to.
Eastham that you were talking about last year? You referenced them and, or?
Wellfleet.
Wellfleet, okay. You said to go see their
Yes.
system.
Yes.
Would impress us.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
I did.
My predecessor did it.
Okay, I'm done.
Take credit.
Full disclosure.
Jim? No, I have no additional questions. Thank you.
No
Thank you.
My
I know, I'm
God.
surprised.
Jeez.
Joe?
You wore them out.
So, what this proposal is talking about is a records management database with shelving, with the boxes. The King information box, one box is equal to any standard file cabinet. And so that one box equals one file cabinet drawer equals 2 cubic feet of records. I say all this because, as I just mentioned, my predecessor in Wellfleet had gone through community preservation for funding, had brought them in, and they started the month after I started and the month after she retired. I had worked with them in the town of Braintree before that. But what I've learned through having the system in Wellfleet is ahead of the radical changes, my words, no one else's, to the the public records law, which went into effect January of this year, which created that new entity of records access officer. The town of Wellfleet lucked out, because now when I get a public records request, the first thing I can do is if I don't immediately have the record as a meeting minutes or some sort of document, I immediately go to the database under that particular department and I find the box where it's located. So it has saved the town money and eliminated the need for us to do what a lot of other municipalities are doing right now, and that's buying software applications that just manage records requests, but do not get to the records management part of it. Because the selling point for this project is not only those boxes and the shelving units, but when that company does their process, you, for the first time, have a detailed database of all of the records that you have, but they match it to the retention schedule. And the beauty of that is, archives are for permanent records and historical records, but storage is for all records. And the benefit of having this system tied into the retention schedule is, and it takes a lot for municipal clerks to agree to this. I know I had a tough time with it. But part of the retention is appropriately destroying records when you should.
Right.
Because unfortunately, there are municipalities that, and I was related to one years ago, and it was on my watch, where the town was found to be liable because they kept records that they otherwise were not legally required to keep. So the law department came down and said, we need to establish a retention schedule. So I need to say that again and clearly for anyone that's listening. Destruction of records is a part of records storage. It's all dictated by the supervisor of public records, state and municipal. We have a manual to go by. But using this particular system, to me, what I've found to be a great benefit is when you use this system and you destroy records in accordance with the retention schedule, it produces a report of what record had existed. And that report is a permanent record. So that when a clerk gets a public records request for a record that they should not have based on the retention schedule, they can still show proof that they had it when they were legally required and they were legally able to destroy it. And that is the response to the public record. So to me, and that's why I wanted to split out the two projects, they're both equally worthy. You can't store your records in a suitable place until you know how you're going to store them. Meaning I would envision, and I know firsthand, just being a fellow municipal clerk, that the clerk's vault has predominantly the permanent records, that they're the clerk's records because they're permanent. And there's an expectation under the law that if they're nowhere else, they're there. The system that could exist at the community center will house some permanent records. What will also house what we consider to be durable records, records that are permanent until they're not. Meaning, if this piece of paper, if we know right away by the contents of it, the retention schedule says you only must keep this for 7 years after issuance. Well, we need to keep that permanently secured for those 7 years. It is as permanent as any forever record until we destroy it. Meaning it must be secured in according to the standards of fire suppression, security, HVAC. The reason why we asthmatics have problems with our own vaults is the mold that exists there. The records management program won't get rid of the mold. The record storage system will. And that to me is why they're complementary, but they do have their own standalone requirements and merits. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess that was a primer in record storage.
Is there any other questions from the board to the applicants? Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Okay, under old business, this is now old business, so I'm going to ask the question. There's a member of the Board of Selectmen in the room, so, and he may or may not have the answer to this question. I think he may. When I was going through the Eltridge Conservation lands, the question is, if the town takes that land by eminent domain, can that property be hunted?
I do not have the answer to that question. I don't think the eminent domain laws would prohibit anyone from hunting it, but it will be a piece of conservation, so it should be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, who will decide whether it can be hunted or not.
Okay.
David? If I could just clarify that, under eminent domain, you can take land for any public purpose. So if hunting is determined to be a public purpose, then it could be used for that, even if it's taken by eminent domain.
Thank you very much. Okay, anything else from the board? Next meeting?
Next Thursday, the 14th.
Starting to see you guys a lot.
Is there any particular request that any of the board members have for information that we haven't already gone over? Just to keep up with the rolling ball. We're all set?
Just on another matter, nameplates?
Go ahead. Oh, yeah, that's right. I'll make that request. Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
This video is to show you how to post meeting minutes to the Town of Harwich website. When you get to the homepage of the Town of Harwich website, you will scroll down and click on the login button at the bottom of the screen. If this is your first time logging into the Town of Harwich website, you will have to enter your username and your password. If you have already logged in before, all you have to do is click the login button, as the information will be automatically filled in. Next, go over to the Boards and Committees drop-down menu and select the board or committee that you're posting meeting minutes for. For this example, we will be posting meeting minutes for the Agricultural Commission. When you get to your board or committee page on the left side of the screen, you will see this list of items. You will be clicking on Create Meeting Minutes. For the title, type in the name of the board or committee. and select the date of the meeting that the minutes are from. So for this example, we will say that the Agricultural Commission had a meeting on November 14th. Move over to the side over here and click on e-subscriber notification, and you're going to want to check off this box. That way, anybody who has signed up to receive e-alerts from the Town of Harwich website whenever an Agricultural Commission meeting minutes is uploaded, they will receive an email saying that that meeting's minutes have been posted to the town's website. Next, you click back on the Meeting Minutes tab, and that takes you back to your main page over here. Then you scroll down and you click on the Choose File button. We'll be grabbing a random set of minutes for this example. As you can see, the name of the minutes has appeared over here. Next, you click Upload. If you wish, you can copy and paste the meeting minutes into the body section down here, but for this example, we will not be doing that. When you have uploaded your file, scroll back to the top of the page and click Save and Close. And the meeting minutes have been posted. Hello, this is a guide on how to post agendas to the Town of Harwich website. The first thing you do when you go to the main page of the Town of Harwich website is you scroll down and you click the login button at the bottom of the screen. If this is your first time logging on to the website, you will type in your username and your password. If you have already done so, then you just have to click Login, as it will autofill your username and your password for you. The next step is to navigate to the board or committee that you are posting an agenda for. For demonstration purposes, I will choose the Agricultural Commission. When you get to the board or committee page, on the left side of the screen, you will see these items. You will click on Create Meeting Agenda. Then you go down to Title and you type in the board or committee. So in this instance, it is the Agricultural Commission. And then you type in the date of the meeting. So for this example, we will pick December 12th. So 12/12/2017. Next, you go down to date, and you do December 12th. And let's say the meeting is at 6 p.m. So 6:00 p.m. Then you move over to the left side of the page and you click on e-subscriber notification and you check off this box. This ensures that when the agenda is posted, any member of the Town of Harwich or anybody who has subscribed to receive notifications from the Agricultural Commission when an agenda is posted will receive that notification. You click back on Meeting Agenda and it takes you back to your main page right here. You scroll down and you click on Choose File where it says Upload File. I will be picking a random file at the moment. Double click and you'll see that the name of the agenda has been posted right there. Next, you click Upload. And you'll see that it has been uploaded. You can choose whether or not you want to copy and paste the agenda itself into this body section, but for this example, I will not be doing that. Once your file has been uploaded, you will scroll back to the top of the screen and you will click Save and Close. The agenda has been posted.